Greetings, welcome, Internet, Brunch Church. We are glad that you could join us here today, Sunday. We moved our time a little bit. We're meeting at 12. We're doing a stream here. We're doing kind of a modified version of our normal service so that we can do it live stream. We are glad that you could join us. We're going to do a few songs. We're going to have a message. And yeah, we invite you to worship along with us and just kind of hang out this morning. Enjoy our service.
Reason why you are moving, you are still, you are.
we move into a time of message or a sermon, we typically like in this time, in this part of the service, to start with a prayer, just kind of just orient us as we're transitioning from one part of the service to another. And I would like to offer up a psalm as a kind of a written prayer. So we sometimes forget this, but in the original context, psalms are used for a lot of reasons. The Psalms of the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. But one of the things they do is they function as liturgy. They function as a part of the worship of the temple, and they can have this effect of being a prayer. So if you're ever looking for a prayer, psalms are a good place to start. So join with me, if you would, in reading Psalm 23. I'm just going to read kind of an updated version of that, but we'll be reading Psalm 23 as a prayer. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. They let me rest in grassy meadows, lead me to restful waters, keep me alive, guide me in proper paths for the sake of their good name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table for me in front of my adversaries. You bathe my head in oil. My cup is so full that it spills over. Yes, goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the Lord's house as long as I'm alive. Amen. Well, greetings. It is good to be here with y'all. Thank you to the band. Thank you to the folks, the support, everyone who's putting this together. And it's great to be with you online as well, as we're kind of making this transition and we're doing all this and kind of adjusting to something new. Now, I want to say greetings and hello and good morning or good noon. I'm still not quite sure how to say good day, top of, I don't know, good and happy noon, happy lunchtime. Hope y'all are doing well. Things are pretty chaotic right now. Things are pretty crazy. Everything's kind of shutting down. But we wish you all well. We wish you all blessings in this chaotic time. Now, with respect to what we're doing in our message series right now, we are about halfway through a series that we've been doing, and it's on the 7 deadly sins. And we're exploring this old Christian tradition, this tradition of naming 7 sins in particular. They're not found in any list in the Bible or anything like that, but they come from just kind of discourse, this kind of conversation happening among Christians in the early church who were kind of putting together lists of things that they considered problematic. And they kind of boiled it down to these 7. And we've been using these 7 and talking about them not as something to induce shame, not as something to kind of induce paralyzing guilt and stuff like that, because that doesn't really help. When we get so bogged down with this label of sin that we can't do anything, that we just feel guilty, and we forget the idea of grace altogether, that kind of defeats the purpose. And that's not really what we've been doing in this series. Rather, we're using these 7 traits, these 7 deadly sins, to bear witness to the full extent of the human condition. Right? Because we know on the one hand, humans are capable of great things. We're capable of great saintly acts. We have Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King on the one hand. But then on the other hand, we also know of terrible destructive capacity that we find in ourselves, in others, in history. So we're using the 7 deadly sins as kind of a way to talk about the full extent of what it means to be human, both the good, but also kind of the dark side of ourselves. So far we've talked about wrath, pride, and envy. Today we're talking about sloth. Now, maybe you already know that term, but that's not a term we use all the time, apart from the animal, the sloth, which is a good starting point. But basically, sloth is just laziness. Sloth just kind of equals laziness. Now, this could probably be more fine-tuned. There's probably a definition in the Oxford English Dictionary or something like that gives us a better, more nuanced definition. Maybe there are English majors out there who don't think that should be equated just like that. But at a popular level, this is how this gets discussed. When we talk about sloth, when we talk about this issue, we talk about it in the context of laziness. And the animal sloth is a good example for this, right? It sleeps a lot, it moves super, super slowly, and it's so stationary that its fur becomes a home for algae and all kinds of bugs. It's kind of, I'd say it's cool. I don't know if it's cool, it's kind of gross. But it's interesting at the very least. So on the surface, this comes across as a fairly simple issue. Something like, don't be lazy, or it's a sin to be lazy. And we even get this in Scripture a little bit, right? Especially from Proverbs. So Proverbs 10, 4 through 5 says, laziness brings poverty. Hard work makes one rich. Proverbs 6:6 says, go to the ant, you lazy person. Observe its ways and grow wise. Proverbs 26:15. Lazy people bury their hand in the bowl, too tired to return it to their mouth. And there are many, many more examples from Proverbs, which leads me to believe whoever was putting together Proverbs had paid for one too many dinners. But it's a theme all throughout Proverbs, and we find it in other places in Scripture. So that's it, right? Message over, simple, straightforward. Don't be lazy, the end. Well, yes and no. As with everything we talk about, and if you've kind of been with us in our message series so far and before, it's complicated. Take the Bible, take Scripture itself, for instance. Even though it talks a lot about laziness, it talks about sloth and not doing this, it talks about working hard, it also commands rest. Scripture also demands that we rest. God rests on the seventh day of creation. You have God creating all these things, and then God sets aside one day, 1/7 of the time of creation, simply to rest. And then that becomes a cosmic precedent for the way Israel is also supposed to be at every level of its society. So it becomes a command in Exodus 23:12. Do your work in 6 days, but on the seventh day you should rest so that your ox and donkey may rest, and even the child with your female slave and the immigrant may be refreshed. They must cease their work also. They must allow their fields, their animals, their servants to rest. Basically, God takes this command and injects it into human society, even those that are based on exploitation of slaves and cheap migrant labor, demanding that these folks not be pushed to exhaustion. As a side note, based on that last text, if you're wondering why God doesn't command the abolishing of slavery, if you want to discuss that, we would love to talk about that. That's actually a major sticking point in Christian history and American history as well. We don't have the time to address that today, but please feel free to message us. We love talking about that, having those kind of discussions, because it speaks to the complexity of Scripture. So yeah, feel free to message us about that. Anyway, pivoting back to our message. We have commands on both sides, right? We have commands to do stuff, don't do stuff. Be hardworking, but also rest. Make sure that your animals rest. Make sure that your fields rest. If you're not allowed to plant certain fields, they too, the land itself, the land must also rest. Now maybe it seems like we're sort of setting up a false dichotomy here. But what I'm trying to do is kind of say that Scripture is hitting on a deep, complex theme in what it means to be a human, right? We need to work. We are hardwired to work. We are biologically driven to create, to provide, to build things, to make beautiful things, even to make art. We are driven to create and to work, and to find meaningful work, hopefully. But we are also driven to rest, and we also need to rest as well. We need to work, and we need not to work. We need to work, and we need not to work. So that's a little bit about the framing. So with that framing in mind, let's talk a little bit about sloth. Sloth talk. Sloth talk. No? Okay. What is sloth exactly? More than laziness, we want to make a better definition here. More than laziness, we might say that sloth is when we are struggling to accomplish things in our life that we want or need to do. When we are struggling to accomplish things in our lives that we want or need to do or achieve. Now this can be in the domain of faith and discipleship, right? This can apply to our spiritual walks and things like that. Maybe we're trying to develop new disciplines. We're trying to be better at reading Scripture. We're trying to be better at understanding Scripture. Reading a book that talks about faith and history and things like that. Or trying to develop a deeper prayer life. Or just get a better handle on spiritual formation and what it means to be a disciple. But it also shapes right into personal development. How do we reach new goals? How do we eat healthy, act healthy, exercise, all these kind of things? We want to study more on a topic. We want to learn more about something. How can we kill it more on that side hustle that's really important to us because we need to make a little bit more money so that we can make sure we're hitting our rent every month? Whatever it is, we have these things in our lives that we're trying to achieve. And maybe you have those desires, but you find that old sloth creeping up, lurking in the background, keeping you from doing the things that you want or need to achieve, the things you want or you need to do. So what can be done about that, right? This is kind of the important question. It's easy to kind of just write off laziness as sin or something and not really get into ways to address that. The truth is, all of us find resistance at some point in ourselves when it comes to trying to achieve certain things. It may be a bigger struggle for some than for others, right? We know this, that human personalities kind of hit on a spectrum. You index the different kind of parts of different spectrums. And laziness is one of these things, or struggling to achieve things. That's a better definition. We all fall at a different point on that spectrum. But every single one of us is going to run into this issue where we find resistance trying to achieve certain things. And so it's important to realize a couple of things. First, you're not alone in this. If this is a struggle that you're having, you are not alone in this struggle. Something like 20% of the population wrestles with chronic or acute procrastination. 20%, 1 in 5, that is a huge number. And that's the kind of procrastination that prohibits people from doing well in work, prohibits them from doing well in school, the kind of thing that leads to dropping out, or things like that, right? So you're not alone if this is a thing that you're feeling. Second, knowing this, knowing that it's an issue, we basically have to dig down and dig in. We've got to do a lot of paying attention, a lot of good, solid introspection. Like so many of the issues that we've been talking about in our series so far in the 7 Deadly Sins, sloth is really, I would argue, or submit to y'all this morning, sloth is an emotion management problem, right? We don't necessarily think of it in this term, because it's kind of linked to all this other kind of mythology of hard work and these kind of things. But sloth is linked to emotion management. It's rooted in our motivations. And motivations fall into the domain of emotions. Are we attracted towards something, or do we have an aversion to push away from something? That's an emotional problem. That is a problem of affect. And sloth is rooted in the latter. It's rooted in the domain of aversion, trying to avoid certain things, right? Pushing away, pushing back, having an aversion, being demotivated to do certain things. So to get at this, we really have to do some work to sit with our moments of sloth and figure out what exactly is going on. When we have these moments, when we find this resistance in ourselves, what is keeping us from doing the things that we want or need to do? We often act like sloth is the cause of our problems. We act like laziness is the cause of our problems. Like, man, if I weren't so lazy, I could do X, Y, or Z. If I weren't so lazy, I would get to the gym. I would work extra hours. I would achieve this, do that. But the reality is sloth is a symptom of deeper problems. And we have to dial in those issues to correctly address what's going on. And there are a lot of things that can trigger this kind of sloth or laziness, whatever we want to call it. One thing is generalized anxiety, right? It is very easy to think of, if you think of an anxious person or you think of a neurotic person, it's a very typical stereotype that these people are people who get things done because they can't rest, right? They get too antsy if they're not doing everything that needs to be done. But the truth is, anxiety can push people to achieve things, but it can also push people to shut down. I've known many capable, talented, smart people over the years who are smarter than I am, more capable, who don't achieve things because when they run into a problem, their anxiety shuts them down rather than propels them forward. This is a generalized anxiety issue. So that's one cause of sloth or laziness, what we call those things. Low self-esteem is another one, right? Sometimes sloth is rooted in a low sense of self-worth, a deep fear that we're going to fail at whatever task that we're supposed to be doing. We have this weight. We're given a task, an important thing at work, an important thing at school, an important thing with our family, and we just know because we think so poorly of ourselves, we know in our bones we are not good enough, that we're not going to achieve that task, so we don't even bother to do it. We just do something that we know how to do. We stay in our comfort zone so that we don't even fail. There's also a sense of hopelessness or meaningless that sometimes drives sloth, right? Sometimes sloth hits us because we are doing or have to do work that is so devoid of meaning for us that we just cannot muster the motivation. We just cannot do that task for the 39th time in the same day that brings us absolutely no joy at all. We've all had jobs like that, right? I've worked a lot of jobs over my lifetime. But hands down, one of the most difficult was when I was working just in data entry. If you've ever worked in a data entry job, it is difficult. You just sit there for 8 hours, just plugging in numbers over and over and over and over, and then they're the same numbers are the same thing over and over. And at one point, I was working in a library context, and I just couldn't handle it, so I ended up kind of just getting a book on Inuits and learning more about Inuit culture. And I would just sit at my desk, and I would do my data entry, but I would just read as much as I could about Inuit culture. Just because I could not handle how much the job itself was just difficult to be motivated to do. And we've all probably had that moment. We've all had jobs or tasks like that. So these three forms of sloth require different approaches, right? Generalized anxiety is definitely going to require some form of counseling. Some form of counseling. Maybe medication. But also just a lot of practice at managing negative emotions. And until those are addressed, until we get a handle on the way that our emotions impact us and how strongly we feel them, especially the negative ones, the negative thoughts, the negative words that are kind of swimming around in our minds, until we get a handle on those, we are going to struggle with that paralysis. Self-esteem kind of falls along a similar fault line. It may also require some counseling, but it requires a lot of intentional work on our part to develop a healthier sense of ourselves, to catch negative thoughts midstream, to pay attention to the way we're talking to ourselves and the way that we've heard ourselves talked about by people around us, by parents, by siblings, by teachers, by friends, and the self-identity that we build out of that. And we have to learn how to catch that and build a healthier conception of ourselves. Hopelessness or meaninglessness. This may require a full job change. There are some jobs that just do not work in the context of motivating because they just don't line up. And we can't always do that, obviously. There's a lot of things that dictate the kind of work that we end up taking up. But ideally, we can start moving to, we can locate the things that we love, kind of get a sense of our passion, and start working toward that. Find a job, and maybe if it's not the job that we love, it's at least adjacent to the kind of work that we like to do. Or we can find a job that we can at least do okay with while it allows us time to do something that we love on the side. These are just a few examples of, again, dialing in what's driving the sloth and then trying to address it. There could be a lot of other underlying causes, right? And there could be more than one. These are like streams that move into and out of each other. And it's very complicated. It becomes this kind of Gordian knot, this tangled ball of yarn. The way these things kind of impact the way we think about motivation and the way we feel toward different things. The bottom line in all of the things we're saying this morning, we have got to be more nuanced about this sin label that we're putting on the issue of sloth or laziness. That is a heavy word. It is a heavy term. It's important. It belongs in our lexicon. But when it comes to laziness or sloth, I'm not sure that that's quite the right way to think of it. We also need to bring in the emotional and the spiritual well-being components of this. Because until we do that, we're going to just be kind of struggling under the weight of these labels, the weight of feeling like we're failing or something like that. Once we come at it from the angle of emotional and spiritual well-being, then we have to begin to do the hard work of dialing in just what is motivating our sloth moments, our laziness moments. Because we want to overcome these things, right? We have passions, we have dreams, we have desires, we have dreams for ourselves, dreams for our family, dreams for our kids. And we want to achieve those things as much as we're able, as much as is possible. We want to do things that we're passionate about. But that requires doing this kind of deep dive, this deep dig into the ways that we're motivated, and to start to do the hard work of catching and working toward healing those things. Join me in prayer, if you would. God, we are thankful for today. God, for a time to gather both in person, online. And God, we say a prayer just for everybody who's joining us at this time. God, we ask that you might just illuminate our hearts. God, help us to see and understand the depth of the things that motivate us. God, give us eyes to see the complexity of our feelings, God, the complexity of our spirituality, God, the complexity of our emotional well-being. God, give us eyes to see the things that are motivating us, the things that are shutting us down. And God, grant us the courage as well to begin to work on those things that we can. Because God, we have things that we want to do. We have dreams and desires and passions. God, things we want to bring into the world. And God, we ask for aid in doing that. Pray these things in your name. Amen. Well, thanks for joining us. Before signing off, just want to do a doxology for y'all. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make their face to shine upon you and be gracious to you and give you peace. Go with God. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next week at 12 p.m. Have a great day.